trade infrastructure for sure, I think has has been brought up as an opportunity for us as Canadians. So I think that we should be looking at those very things and those very infrastructure things that are going to be important for Canada and for how they can enable our diversification into the future to the betterment of the Canadian economy.
But as Minister of International Trade, why weren't you thinking about that before?
So today we're going to be taking a look at a few different things. We're going to be hearing from the RCMP and what's going on with the border, as this week there's been a few issues. We're going to be taking a look at some new polling data that just came out yesterday, as well as Vassy doing Vassy things and destroying one of the Liberal panelists that came onto her show, amongst other things. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we do get started, I want to quickly address something that people were trying to bring to my attention yesterday in regards to the global affairs situation. I understand there was some posts being made either on Twitter or Instagram or something on social media about maybe the government wiping out the databases and we're not having access to this anymore. After doing my own digging on the website itself, it was indeed slow and a lot of the times pages weren't being loaded, but eventually things did start loading back up. I'll put up some screenshots that I took. The first one was talking about how we are currently experiencing technical difficulties with the project browser. And then later on, it got updated to we are working to restore the access along with all the data, I believe, as soon as possible. Now, if you're familiar with David Moose on the Loose, he's been doing a segment on global affairs and all the projects and the money that's being spent. I believe it's called like Far Off Ripoff or something like that.
This episode of Far Off Ripoff, we've got $4.5 million of Canadian tax dollars spent on.
And he's been doing a great job bringing this to attention. And I understand if you've been following any of the US stuff with Elon Musk and the Doge and now the US aid situation where they're finding money's being misspent in a lot of places, David's kind of exposing that as well. It does seem a little bit, I guess some could say fishy with the timing of it all. But from watching David's video yesterday, he does show that he had access back to the website. Things were just taking a long time. I myself have still not have access. Maybe I'm in the wrong section that he's in, but from the research that I've done, it seems like everything's fine. There was a hiccup in the system and whatnot. I understand people wanted me to cover this or talk about this, but I tend to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row when I make these videos. If you've ever checked out my description, I usually leave all the sources, the videos that I'm taking this information or articles from. So yes, I understand the explosion around these posts and the fact that the website was down and you couldn't go there was a bit of a hot topic. But until I can actually verify things or it's for sure that, these things are what they seem to be, I typically don't try to get into them. So that being said, it looks like they're still working from as of right now while I've been on the page and I hit refresh on the browse projects section. It's still giving me that notice saying we are working to restore along with all the data. Maybe by tomorrow or this weekend, it'll be back up and running. Who knows? But I just wanted to quickly touch on that. Now let's get back into the video. Now, yesterday, the CBC did a segment on the newest polling data that just came out from Angus Reid, as well as putting it up against all the other pollsters, even ECOS, which is ridiculous. But this is a little clip of the new numbers.
Donald Trump's return and Justin Trudeau's looming exit have shaken up Canadian politics, and it's all leading to some movement in the polls. The latest data from Leger suggests the Liberals are rebounding in Quebec, gaining 7 points to get back into a first-place tie with the Bloc after falling all the way back to third. Leger's data also suggests the Liberals could jump to 38% if Mark Carney was the leader. Now, ECOS has reported the most dramatic shifts, putting the Liberals nationally just 3 points behind the Conservatives. That's a surge not seen anywhere else. Last month, Abacus data still had the Conservatives ahead of the Liberals nationally by 21 points. Leger has it at 18, Nanos at 16. And today, Ipsos has the Conservatives lead at just 13 points nationally. So that result is in line with a recent poll from the Angus Reid Institute, where the survey says the Conservative lead could shrink to just 14 points if Mark Carney was the Liberal leader.
Now, none of this is completely surprising, as with this new leadership race and with Justin out of the picture now, there was no doubt going to be some more boosting in the Liberal Party, maybe some more support behind them, because it would be a new leader. It wouldn't be Justin anymore as the face of the Liberals. However, if you've noticed, the Conservatives have gone down a little bit in every poll, but they are still staying above the 40 mark, which is impressive. And it's the NDP who's actually suffering and losing support there. And those people are hopping back onto, I guess, the Liberal train. So the NDP not looking so hot. Liberals have gained a little bit of a boost, but the Conservatives still have a good lead. As things progress, I mean, the options are going to get smaller and smaller. Right now, we have about 5 candidates. 2 of them came out today with some more press conferences. One of them, Karina Gould, complained a whole bunch about how it was unfair, the price range of things. So she might not even be able to make it. But since we are on the topic of Karina, let's take a look at what she had to say about this whole situation.
The second last funding deadline for Liberal leadership candidates is tomorrow, as candidates need to secure $125,000 by 5 p.m. Eastern in order to stay in the race. Tomorrow's installment is part of the $350,000 total sum the party requires to be paid before February 17th. It's a figure some contenders like Chrystia Freeland have criticized for being too high, and Karina Gould has warned supporters she might not make it past the next deposit deadline. And Karina Gould, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, David.
So you said today that despite the efforts from the party's establishment, you're still in the race. What have you been battling against? What are these efforts in this contest?
Well, look, the party set the entry fee for this race very, very high. And, we've seen that means that there are a number of potential candidates that may have run that didn't. And there are a couple that have already dropped out because of that. But my campaign is powered by people across this country. And so we are well on track to meet the fundraising deadline, but it is high. And, my campaign didn't exist when the party set these rules, but we're doing everything that we can to meet it.
Okay, they set it high. Do you think they set it high for the reasons that have been suggested to make sure that, a credible candidate can get into this with a broad level of support? Or do you think they set it high? You've used the word coronation a few times because they were trying to orchestrate a coronation. How do you view the motivation here?
I'll give it to David. That's actually a really good question. And the way that Karina is describing this leadership race as a coronation is very true as well. Basically, a coronation is where they crown a king or a queen. And the way that things are going, everything's pointing to Mark Carney as who they want to win. It's not even really about the debate system or, democracy. It's just basically, we want Carney. We've put everything behind him. We put all the support, all the cabinet ministers, the MPs, everybody's supporting Carney. We're dressing him up with all the bells and whistles because he's eventually just going to roll into that position. This leadership race is a joke. It's not an actual race. They're going to pretend and they're going to put on the show and dance of all the debates and all that stuff coming up. But none of that is going to happen until the money comes in, actually, because they haven't even been told when the debate dates are. Take a listen.
Well, look, I don't think a coronation is good for the party. I think we've been down that road in 2011. And I think what's best is to have a diversity of voices that are having a debate about who we are as a party and what we want to do as a country. The party set this fee high. They'll have to explain why they did that. But what I think the consequence of it is that we have fewer candidates in this race. And if we think about what this fee represents, I mean, the Conservatives had a $300,000 entry fee over 8 months. The Liberal Party set this at $350,000 over 8 weeks. I'm not sure that the Liberal Party of Canada raises $1.7 million in this same amount of time.
Now, I do understand what she's saying in terms of 8 months versus 8 weeks, but in all reality, she only has Justin Trudeau to blame for this, because if he had just resigned, say, when they lost St. Paul's, that riding, then these guys would have had plenty of time to campaign, to fundraise, and maybe there would have been more candidates that would have thrown their hat in the ring. But this guy left them high and dry. So really, she has no reason to be crying over spilled milk because it was Justin that did this to them. But let's continue.
And so as we're speaking now, from what I take from what you said, Karina Gould, and correct me if I'm wrong, the $125,000 that you need by 5 o'clock tomorrow, you don't have it yet? Am I understanding that correctly? But you think you'll have it by tomorrow?
We are very close. I'm confident we're going to have it by tomorrow.
Okay, you're confident you're going to make the deadline tomorrow, but then you've got to turn around and raise another $125,000, if my math is right, by the 17th of February. So this speaks to the challenge that you have to deal with. So if it's last minute now, are you worried about that final one? Because that's what gets you into the debate, and that's what gets you on the ballot.
Look, I mean, the party has made some decisions about having the debates after that final fundraising fee. Again, when we look at other parties, they would often spread these payments out more. So it gives people an opportunity to watch these debates. I mean, last week when I was on your program, we talked about the fact that the party hadn't really yet set the debate deadline. I agree with, some of the other candidates that we should have more debates and we should have them sooner. This is a very short race. And I think it's only a good thing for us as candidates to have these debates. Right. It's only a good thing for us as a party to do this. But look, when it comes to the next fundraising deadline, again, did the party make a decision to set another high fee in a short period of time? Yes. But what I can say is the fact that we have met every single one of these deadlines, are going to meet this next one, gives me great confidence that I'm going to be able to do it again next week.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's safe to say we probably won't be seeing Karina Gould on the debating stage. It doesn't sound like she's even going to have enough money for tomorrow's deadline, let alone the next deadline. But if we look at who she's going up against, we have the banker, Mark Carney. He has the money. We have Chrystia Freeland, who most likely has the money. We have the chiropractor / businesswoman, Ruby Dahl. She's got the money, as well as Frank Bayless, who's that billionaire guy. He's got the money. So it sounds like Karina is most likely the only one who won't be able to make it. With all that being said, let's now pivot to the RCMP interview that was with Vassy, as they're talking a little bit more about the border. Now, over the past few days, the news has just been like very scare tactic-y and fear-mongering. They keep emphasizing trade wars when Donald Trump has never indicated that this is a trade war. He's talked about the border specifically, but just take a look at this little snippet of different news outlets saying trade war, trade war, trade war.
Are growing fears that the threat of Donald Trump's tariffs could take a bite out of Canada's housing market, especially if we find ourselves in a trade war.
Canada has avoided a trade war for now.
Good morning, Roger. Of course, as you mentioned, the trade war with the U.S. taking center stage.
Sharing strategies to avert a trade war. Putting the political divide aside, government leaders have been meeting to prepare for war.
Now, a few videos ago, I did play the clip from the National Economic Council director, Kevin Hassett, who said to the reporter he doesn't understand how the Canadian government is taking this as a trade war when the executive order says that this is about border security. Now, take his word or not, that's what's being laid out right now. But the RCMP was actually interviewed by Vassy today, and they've admitted that they've increased their border security there, and they actually had 3 separate incidences this week in relation to that. Take a look.
RCMP are highlighting 3 separate incidences at the border here in Alberta and Manitoba. Mounties claim the Wednesday news conference has nothing to do with politics.
To anyone who is thinking about crossing the border, don't.
RCMP say just this Tuesday, an American national illegally crossed through the Coots border crossing in Alberta, leading Mounties on a high-speed chase through the Lethbridge area.
A tire deflation device was successfully used by the RCMP south of Mill River, and the vehicle came to a stop. The male then fled on foot and was pursued by RCMP police dog services and other RCMP officers.
Police say that chase ended with the man shooting himself and dying. Earlier this week, RCMP again at the Coots, Alberta border arresting these 9 people crossing on foot with suitcases, including 5 children. Last month, Manitoba RCMP stopping 6 people from crossing the border on foot using thermal imaging from an RCMP plane. The 9 people at Coots and 6 in Manitoba were from various countries in South and Central America, as well as Africa. Security concerns at the U.S.-Canada border have been heightened in the midst of threatened tariffs from the United States, which President Donald Trump has said is because of the flow of illegal drugs from Canada. Wednesday, RCMP insisted their press conference celebrating border efforts has nothing to do with tariff talk.
I think we have 3 incidents today. As you can imagine, we also wanted to show, because I think sometimes in the RCMP, we have a lot of different things that we're doing out there, and so many things happen, and the world is very dynamic, and we're trying to get out as much information as we could. And the unfortunate incident that obviously happened yesterday, we thought it was important to get out here today.
Now, I'm sure many people will argue with me that fentanyl is not the major problem. We provide whatever was less than 1%, even though when we broke down the numbers, that so-called 50 pounds of drugs equals about 10 million people. But again, I find it hard to believe that that's all they found and that's the evidence they're using. When we have articles like this from the government, or stats from the government coming out saying more than 1,500 stolen Canadian vehicles identified around the world since February. And this was an article from last year. And it says the more than 1,015 vehicles stolen in Canada have been identified by police forces around the world since the RCMP started sharing data with Interpol in February. A statement from the International Police Agency headquarters in Lyon, France, said that the number of vehicles traced back to Canada makes this country one of the top 10 sources for stolen vehicles out of the 137 countries sharing the data. It then goes on to say, a national crisis. The federal government estimates that 90,000 vehicles are reported stolen every year in Canada. You're telling me that you're able to track all of the drugs that's coming out of Canada and it only accounted for 50 pounds, yet you can't even keep track of 90,000 vehicles? I'm sorry, but that's very hard to believe. And it gets harder for me to believe because he indicates how many labs they bust every year, which to me indicates that there's quite a bit of production happening. Yet he makes the claim that there's a lack of evidence that it's more than 1%. A lack of evidence is not evidence enough. If you guys aren't able to find it all, like you're not able to find 90,000 vehicles a year, well, then the number could be higher than 1%. But just listen to him with Vassy.
We know that the latest seizure in Toronto, you're probably referring to Toronto, where was 835 kilos of coke that made its way from Mexico through the States all the way up to Canada. So there still are these well-known smuggling routes to bring in the products, and we strongly feel that these routes are also being used to smuggle anything from fentanyl. Or precursors either into the country or the raw product into the United States.
But right now, we're the ones increasing our posture at the border. There's no indication that they are.
Well, on the northern border, I'm not quite sure if they've increased, but you can understand the dynamic between the southern border of the United States and the northern border. The southern border is far more busy than the northern border.
Now, obviously, nobody's going to argue that their southern border is not worse off than their northern border. But our southern border is still a problem. I did a video back in August of last year about this, which I'll leave down below if you guys want to check it out. But essentially, there's so many individuals who are on like a terror watch list who are coming through our border. I think in the report there was like 600 individuals who were captured. Close to 500 of them were on a terror watch list, meaning they had already entered our country without being detected somehow, and we're still able to make it all the way to the southern border to cross into the US. So yeah, we have an issue there, and we need to beef it up. But if we don't beef it up, that's where the tariffs happen. And now with these tariff situation, everybody's all so patriotic and rah, rah, rah. We need to increase inter-provincial trade, and this is where Mary Ng comes in when she was on Vassy being questioned about this and why it's taken so long for the Liberals to try to implement something.
Can interprovincial trade barriers be dealt with, wiped away in 30 days?
The short answer to your question is yes.
Canada is a couple of days into U.S. President Donald Trump's 30-day tariff pause, but there's no sign yet of a permanent reprieve. In your view, Minister, is the threat of these tariffs from Donald Trump about the border, or is it about the trade relationship between our two countries?
Well, I think we have to take the president seriously about the borders, which we have, and very pleased that we have a bit of a reprieve on those tariffs. And I think with respect to tariffs, we're going to have to keep working very, very hard to try to ensure that they don't ever come into place here in Canada, because as I keep saying to the Americans, tariffs aren't good for us, but they certainly aren't good for the American consumers at all. So let's work together to try to find ways to deepen this economic relationship, and tariffs are not good for anyone.
Do you think it's a good idea to deepen the relationship between our two countries, given the unpredictability and uncertainty of the past few weeks with Donald Trump?
Well, the trade relationship with the United States is a really big one. We do over $1 trillion worth of trade. It is an important trading relationship, and I think it's important to ensure we do the work that we need to always do to keep access and preserve access to this market. But you're absolutely right, Vassy. I think Canadians are asking themselves, how is it that we are so dependent on one market? And I, as Canada's trade minister, as you well know, have been spending many, many years crisscrossing the globe, negotiating trade agreements on the one hand, but also ensuring that Canadian businesses are able to get access to those markets. In fact, I'm going to be in the European Union later this weekend, and I will be in some of our CPTPP partners next week with hundreds of businesses in Australia, in Singapore, and Brunei. So making sure that businesses, Canadian businesses, access those markets that the Canadian Free Trade Agreement network provides to them is something we must absolutely do to diversify.
And certainly I wouldn't take away from those efforts, and access to different markets has increased. But at the same time, 75% of our exports still go to a single destination, and that is the United States. Do you expect that in order to escape the application of these tariffs in 30 days, we will have to make concessions in trade?
I don't think so. I think, and we don't know what that is, at the moment. I think what we need to do is to work with Canadians, as we have over, over many, many months, and certainly very intently over this last recent period of time. I think it's really terrific that Canadians are buying Canadian. I would encourage Canadians to keep doing that. But businesses that I talk to today are really asking themselves, what is it that they could be doing in terms of some of their suppliers that they might get at the moment from the United States? Might there be alternatives? I know that work is not going to happen overnight, but I think that work has to, I think businesses rightly are asking themselves and examining that themselves, and we will be there to support them in that work.
Now, Vassy's laying out some very simple questions. Marianne keeps talking about diversifying, going to other places to prompt that we're also a good trading partner for them. Yet then she points out, yeah, but we still do 75% of our trades with the U.S. We might not want to, rely on them so much, but currently that is the fact, and we're not going to really be able to change that anytime soon. And Mary doubles down saying, well, no, we have to diversify. We have to diversify. And then that's when Vassy gets a little snappy with her.
Trade infrastructure, for sure, I think has been brought up as an opportunity for us as Canadians. So I think that we should be looking at those very things and those very infrastructure things that are going to be important for Canada and for how they can enable our diversification into the future to the betterment of the Canadian economy.
But as Minister of International Trade, why weren't you thinking about that before?
And that essentially is the $1 million question, because if you've ever listened to the Liberals, they love to talk about how they've dealt with Trump in the past and his tariffs that he implemented then. Yet it's clear they have not learned from it, because if they've dealt with it, we wouldn't now be having to diversify so aggressively. We have Mary here who's about to tell us that she's going to be going and trying to reach out to so many people. When Vassy's talking about, why haven't you guys moved forward on energy projects like LNG, like pipelines for our gas and our oil? That's the main player. That's what will help our country the most. And this is Mary's response.
We've been absolutely focused on making sure that there are broad access markets for Canadian businesses around the world, and we have succeeded. I mean, we succeeded in
for oil and gas in particular. You've got TMX and you've got LNG Canada, the initial site. But beyond that, there's been a lot of stuff that hasn't gone forward.
Well, there's a lot of things that we have to export and to grow. I take a gazillion, well, maybe not a gazillion, but I take many clean technology companies and clean energy companies abroad. We are developing nuclear capabilities and selling that to places like Romania and to Poland and setting up infrastructure in Southeast Asia. So absolutely, we are selling and wanting to export more energy, and there are many other sources of clean energy that we have certainly been promoting and selling and wanting to sell more around the world.
Now, with an answer like that, I don't imagine they're going to hit this 30-day target like Anita Anand said in her clip. And we already seen the dismay between the premiers, with Legault saying he doesn't want any pipelines. I think even the federal leader, Blanchette, has said that he didn't want pipelines either. There wasn't unity from the start, with Danielle Smith kind of carving out her own path, which I was in favor of, but this is just becoming more of a headache than the Trump thing, to be honest. But as always, that's just my opinion. Love to hear from you guys. I hope you all have a great weekend. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.